Right now, defense attorneys for Donald Trump are trying to chip away at David Pecker's credibility and undermine the former tabloid executive's testimony. I'm back with my all-star panel. And Caitlin, just bring our viewers up to speed on what we have seen so far this morning.
It's interesting because Trump's attorneys are now cross-examining David Pecker, this tabloid king who was the one who revealed all of these details yesterday about how they would suppress these negative stories against Donald Trump by paying people who came forward with those negative stories, whether or not they believed them to be true or not. And so they've been doing this cross-examination, clearly trying to take away from David Pecker's credibility, his memory. They're not being nasty. Trump's attorney is actually being quite polite and trying to be charming in front of the jury, as you would expect. But he is certainly trying to say, well, you told investigators this and this year, and now you're saying this here publicly. David Pecker has stood up for himself and saying, I remember what I said. This is what was said to me. This is what I heard at these meetings. Right now, they're in a bit of confusing line of questioning where Emil Beauvais, Trump's attorney, is questioning David Pecker about that agreement that he struck with the federal government that provided him immunity and is the reason he's on the stand right now and doesn't face any kind of jail time potentially as a result of this. It's not totally clear to me where Trump's attorney is going with this line of questioning, and I do wonder if the jury can follow along with it.
Our reporters in the courtroom are saying that jurors have been paying attention. Their eyes have followed the back and forth between Beauvais and Pecker, and it seems to be, I'm going to go with our JDs over here, that Beauvais is, when he's emphasizing the first paragraph of the non-prosecution agreement that says they will not prosecute. It seems like what they're continuing to try to do is say, okay, guys, jury, this is why he's on the stand right now. He's on the stand because he got a promise that he wouldn't be prosecuted.
Right, so prosecutors are both trying to undermine David Pecker's truthfulness, as Caitlin said, and with this agreement, they're trying to undermine his motives. They said, first of all, when law enforcement came to you, it was at this vulnerable moment when you were about to sell your company and make a lot of money, and they had you. You had to tell them whatever they wanted to hear. You had to do whatever they wanted to say. Okay, there's a sidebar now, which means they're arguing over whether some question is admissible or not. And then the second part of that is, and as a result of that, you got a free pass. You got a walk. They just read the first line that says, you will not be criminally prosecuted for this. And as a result, you're still indebted to them, not financially, but you still have an incentive, a motive to tell them what they want to hear, to shape your story, maybe even in subtle ways.
To tell the prosecution what they want to hear.
Yes, to tell the prosecution what they want to hear, to give them little details, to maybe shade things. So they're not trying to paint Pecker as an outright liar. That'll come later with Michael Cohen. But they're trying to suggest he's compromised.
Jim, you're nodding.
Yeah, I agree 100%. They are trying to show that he cut a deal. He's trying to take care of himself and throw Donald Trump under the bus in the process.
Yeah, something we haven't talked a lot about in the context of this. We focused so much on the criminal implications to AMI, but not the financial ones. And someone can have a financial motive for testifying or even altering their testimony based on the fact that they're sort of in dire straits here. And what the defense is pointing out, that he had a financial incentive, number one, to behave the way he did, and maybe even for testifying today. Now, whether the jury buys it, who knows?
Could I just ask a question? If you get an immunity agreement and they find out you're lying under the immunity agreement, what happens to you? Because my understanding is if you lose your immunity agreement, so doesn't that cut? I mean, we'll see when they do redirect, but doesn't that cut against lying when you have an immunity?
Jamie, you are doing the prosecution redirect right now.
Excellent.
10 minutes from now, they're going to ask that exact question.
Let's see if they're as savvy as Jamie Gingrich.
But you hit it on the head. That will be the response.
I want to, as we're waiting for Trump just tapped Blanche, who was his attorney, on the shoulder and whispered something to him after Blanche sat back down following the sidebar. So the sidebar is over. Let's see what happens with that objection. We don't know what the objection specifically was over. But if I may, Kristen Holmes, I want to remind people of the politics and what is going on here very much outside the courtroom. And a new CNN poll, which asks people who are Trump supporters. This is a national poll. This is a specific question to people who say they will support Donald Trump right now in November. Would they still support him if he is convicted of a crime? 24% say they might reconsider. How worried is the Trump campaign about that figure?
I think they're very worried. I mean, one of the things that Donald Trump's team repeatedly says when they're comparing him to Joe Biden is that Donald Trump has a solid base, that no matter what, people who like Donald Trump will show up for Donald Trump. Their belief being that if President Biden stays with a lower popularity and people don't show up, that Donald Trump could become president again in November. So looking at a poll like that is actually very alarming to people who believe that every single person who supports Donald Trump will show up to vote in November. 24% might not seem like a lot, but just that number when they're banking on those people showing up.
And just looking back at what's happening in that courtroom, Beauvais is now focused on paragraph 3 in the non-prosecution agreement, which discusses the August 2015 Trump Tower meeting.
Can I read you that section that they're talking about as we're trying to fill in the blanks following along here, which I get is not easy? That part of the section says, in or about August 2015, David Pecker, the chairman and chief executive officer of AMI, met with Michael Cohen, an attorney for a presidential candidate, and at least one other member of the campaign. And at that meeting, Pecker offered to help deal with negative stories about that presidential candidate's relationships with women by, among other things, assisting the campaign in identifying such stories so they could be purchased and their publication avoided. Pecker agreed to keep Cohen apprised of any such negative stories.
Thank you so much for finding that. And so, Jim, to you, what does it tell you about the strategy right now by and of the Trump defense team reading that paragraph that Caitlin just found? And I should say, as you respond to that, I want to say that Beauvais asks Pecker whether he recalls that his lawyer said at a 2019 meeting that part of paragraph 3 was, quote, wrong and inaccurate. Pecker says he does not. Maybe that just answered my question.
Yeah, it's just going to go back to memory. It's going to go back to the credibility of the witness, what he remembered, what he said. Again, it's just chipping away. This stuff is chipping away. I think the bigger one is the non-pros agreement generally, because they're going to hammer away on that. But we are getting to the end. This is the best stuff they have because that's what they want to leave the jury with. Can I go back 1 second to the poll? So in Pennsylvania, I'm native of Pennsylvania, Nikki Haley was on the ballot in this last election. She took 17% of the Republican vote. This is a low turnout primary, not a lot on the ballot.
Closed primary.
Reliable, right, closed primary. Only Republicans, and these are reliable Republican voters. Folks that come out for primaries are always kind of that ilk. I think, you couple the 24% with the 17% that's already kind of drifted towards Nikki Haley. We don't know what they're going to do. This matters.
And Kristen, look at what's happening right now. Trump is leaning forward, staring at the screen as Pecker reviews the record from the 2019 meeting. That's really interesting color.
Yeah, he's been really engaged in this. I mean, we know that part of the reason that he goes to these various legal proceedings is because he actually does want to be here. Obviously, he doesn't have a choice here, but in the past, he wanted to see who was testifying. He wants to engage in what's going on. He doesn't want to actually be in a courtroom being charged with anything, but once the legal stuff starts happening, he's been engaged. And we saw that also with the jury selection. He was very riveted on listening to them at times, turning around, particularly someone said that they read The Art of the Deal. That was one that perked him up a little bit. But he is following this closely to try and kind of glean what is going on here.
If I can give a little color about this statement of facts that they're talking about. This is a document that's attached to the non-prosecution agreement itself. It's a public document. Anyone can Google it. And the reason defense lawyers are trying to dispute it, well, it says Pecker says there was a dispute over one word in paragraph 3 of that agreement, quote, selling and purchasing is the same thing. Someone has to buy them, quote, he, meaning Pecker, says. So here's what's happening. This statement of facts was written by prosecutors, not these prosecutors at the DA's office, but the feds across the street, the Southern District of New York. So it has a very pro-prosecution, this was a crime slant to it. And what Donald Trump's defense team right now is doing is trying to undermine it, undermine the truthfulness of it, undermine the motives, because the jury will see this, and it reads like an indictment.
But are they trying to undermine the motive of the prosecution that has nothing to do with this trial, or trying to undermine Pecker's credibility, and are they kind of hitting the same two things with the same stone?
Yeah, I think the last part. I think they're trying to do both things at once. They're trying to suggest the statement itself is not accurate, and they're trying to suggest that as a result of this agreement, David Pecker has bad motives.
But big picture, it's not done yet. These feel like very small inconsistencies and reasonable ones that someone might forget or who's in the room. I'm also curious from the lawyers, this trial's going to go on for, let's say, 6 weeks. And I'm sure from your experience, it ebbs, it flows. Yes, the jurors take notes. But once you get to week 5 or 6, once you've seen Michael Cohen testify or Stormy Daniels testify, I just wonder whether these small inconsistencies fade into the background.
You know, I was thinking the same thing. It does feel a little small ball when you think about the whole thing in the totality, and by the time you get to the end, it's going to look even smaller in the rearview mirror, or is it about building the full?
The little inconsistencies
story.
are small ball, but what they're doing is hammering again and again and again this non-pros agreement, and they're going to say that David Pecker was trying to save his own skin.